First, just want to say thanks for having me. I'm happy to hear that you had a good experience at the panel last year. That was a lot of fun. That was my first experience in Vancouver, so it was a great way to kind of start my trip out there. But as far as winemaking, I went to UC Davis originally, and I went there not for winemaking. I actually went there to wrestle Division One in college, and then also get a great education. I came in as a declared major under mechanical engineer, but as a young kid, I quickly learned I didn't want to be an engineer. So I started dabbling around, taking different courses, and found the intro to winemaking course, which was a lot of fun, just super interesting, kind of a dynamic field. And as I kept taking more and more classes, I really grew a passion. And it was really when I had my first internship at Mum Napa. I started out in sparkling in the lab, and that was when I really understood the culture, how fun the industry is, how much energy and like kind of more of a family community it was. And that really drawed me in. So I knew I had to keep pushing and kind of keep learning from there. So I worked a couple of vintages at Mum Napa, went to Domaine Chandon as my first full-time gig as a lab tech there. And then I changed into still wine. So I went over to Newton Vineyard in St. Helena, and I kind of was at that crossroad where do I continue with sparkling and go with still wine? And at that time, I was just really excited about some of the wines that I was tasting in Napa Valley, so I switched to still wine. I spent 3 years at Newton Vineyard, which was amazing, and then came to Robert Mondavi in 2015. I started out as the enologist there, and really just you know taken under the wing of Jean-Vive Janssens and the other winemakers here, and just learning everything about Robert Mondavi Winery, the vineyards, the culture, the winemaking, the history, what makes this place so special. And it's just a really, honestly, a special place. There's such a great culture here. The vineyards are amazing. The people and the energy that we have here, that, some people have been here for 30, 40 years, and you can feel that. Like there's a reason that people stay here. It's because the wines are amazing and the culture here is really great. So I wanted to continue. So I kept growing, kept evolving, got promoted over the years into my current role as director of winemaking. I think we have some amazing vineyards, right? We've got Toklon Vineyard, we've got a property in Stag's Leap, and the different vineyards that we work with have different personalities, right? They showcase different textures, different tannins, different fruit intensities, and I think that's so important to get across to people, is that vineyards make wines, and those resulting wines can be so distinct and intense and fresh and vibrant. And so, just following along the lines of the traditions of winemaking here at Robert Davi and tweaking things slightly, but just making sure that we're making a number of Cabernets and they're all distinct and they have their own story and own personality. And that's really important to me. Our Napa Valley Sauvignon Blanc is a combination of our two estate vineyards. So we have Toklon Vineyard and then our property in Stag's Leap District as well. And it's a barrel fermented wine. So, roughly 80 to 85% barrel fermented with about 15% tank fermented. But with that, we're using oak that kind of highlights the fruit and lifts it, rather than being very toasty and too spicy and overbearing of the fruit, because Sauvignon Blanc has so much fun aromatics. It's so lively and there's just so much going on. We really want that to shine in the wine. So it is a barrel fermented wine, but really for that, it's building creaminess and texture to really balance out that racy acidity of Sauvignon Blanc that it naturally has, and making a wine that's elegant and juicy and intense, and something that pairs well with food as well. Super important. The Fumé Blanc style is something that Robert Mondavi coined early in the days of the winery, and really he took influence from those great wines of Loire Valley, Puy Fumé, and making wines that really just shout the intensity. You got the California ripeness, so we get enough heat so that it's not very green and underripe, but there's a little bit of dried herb characters that's really interesting coming from Toklon Vineyard. There's that stone fruit, there's some floral elements. But yes, the texture is really important, right? Because it's easy to make a Sauvignon Blanc that's a little bit leaner and very high acid, but when you build up that mid palate and that richness, it really creates a wine that's a little bit more lush and plushness and enjoyable, but it can also pair with food. So trying to make wines that aren't too heavy on your palate and you want to come back for another sip. I mean, it's so special. Tokelon itself is a beautiful, just amazing vineyard. It's located on the west side of Oakville, and Oakville is kind of center cut in the valley north to south. So we get just enough heat and ripeness for the fruit to mature and get to the right flavor profile we're looking for, but it's always cool enough to retain that natural acidity. So it's this really nice of ripeness and freshness that we get in Tokelon. But yeah, To Kalon's well known right across the world for red wines. We're the only producer that has white wine growing in To Kalon. So I like to call it the white wine of To Kalon. We're the only one that's got it, and it's just an amazing personality to the wine. There's juiciness and freshness. There's a lot of dried herb characters, and oftentimes you find a little bit of like a salty salinity character from our wines as well. That's very distinct and kind of a marker for me for To Kalon Sauvignon Blanc, which is super enjoyable for me. Semillon's a really important piece into our Fumé Blanc program. It helps balance out that acidity, give a little bit more richness and creaminess, add some palate weight without being heavy. Our Oakville Cabernet Sauvignon has always had a predominant amount of To Kalon fruit in there. But the difference between our reserve and our estates Cabernet is it's just a different personality. It's a different offering. The thing that's special about the Oakville Cabernet that you're referencing is it has actually all five Bordeaux varieties, and with that, it just makes a different wine. It's got the Malbec, Merlot, Cab Franc, and Petit Verdot. It adds a little bit of floral elements, some texture, some sexy plushness, some a different kind of texture that's a little bit more approachable to drink today versus our reserve Cabernet. So it's really making two totally stylistic wines from the same vineyard. It's a thing that's a combination of thousands of factors, right? So it's where it's at in Napa Valley. It sits in alluvial fans, so really well draining soils. It's kind of, again, center cut north to south in Napa Valley. But really, like it's a place that's proven to make successful wines for over 100 years. And I think there's something with that, right? There's something. It doesn't matter the winemaker that's here. It doesn't matter who's doing it. It's about the vines and how they react to this soil, to this microclimate here in the world. That's special. For me, especially when you're talking about the red wines, but even the whites, there's that dried herb character that's always present in the wines. When you talk about reds, there's always a great natural acidity, like this freshness. It's very vibrant. There's that black, dark red fruit. And sometimes you get some of those almost minty elements or black olives, those kind of interesting savory characters as well. And one thing that's really important is the tannin. There's a lot of tannin in To Kalon, but they're very fine. They're very refined. There's a lot of tannin, but as long as you create a wine that's approachable and plush, those tannins are just so they can be sweet, they can be plush, they can be very giving. But those are some of the commonalities. So the acidity, the kind of fruit profile, and then the tannin structure. I've got two daughters, two young girls, so it's really just spending time with them, getting them to smell my glass of wine at home. Ever since they were young, I would always swirl my glass and have them smell it and see if they could pick up what's in there, whether they knew or not. They'd always say peach, they'd always say plum, and sometimes it just smells like grapes. But that's something I enjoy is kind of showing the wine culture to my family and kind of have them grow up with that. I think is really important. Well, thank you. I appreciate your time. Looking forward to seeing you out there.